Most people believe their life is shaped by what happens to them. But the deeper truth is that life is shaped far more by how they respond to what happens. The difference between someone who stays stuck and someone who becomes mentally strong is not the absence of problems, but the ability to pause before reacting. That small moment of control is where power is either lost or built. Because in real life, situations will not wait for you to feel ready. People will say things that trigger you. Circumstances will not always go your way, and unexpected challenges will appear without warning. But what defines your direction is not the event itself, it is your reaction to it. When a person has no control over their reactions, they become like a leaf in the wind, moving wherever emotion pushes them. A small insult can change their mood for the entire day. A failure can turn into self-hate. A disagreement can become a permanent emotional wound. In that state, life feels heavy not because it is actually overwhelming, but because every moment is being emotionally amplified without control. The mind becomes reactive instead of reflective, and reactive thinking always leads to regret, confusion, and exhaustion. But there is a turning point in every strong person's life when they begin to notice this pattern. They start realizing that reacting instantly does not solve problems, it multiplies them. They see that most emotional reactions are temporary storms that pass quickly, but the damage done during those storms can last much longer. This awareness becomes the first step toward transformation, because once you can observe your reaction instead of being consumed by it, you begin to create space between what happens and what you choose to do next. That space is where strength is born. Imagine someone says something disrespectful to you. The natural impulse is to respond immediately, to defend, to argue, or to prove a point. But in that split second, if you pause instead of reacting, something powerful happens. The emotion loses some of its intensity. You begin to see the situation more clearly. You realize that not everything deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your response. Not every moment needs your emotional involvement. And in that realization, you start reclaiming your control. This does not mean suppressing emotions or pretending they do not exist. It means acknowledging them without being controlled by them. Feeling anger does not make you weak. Feeling hurt does not make you weak. But acting without awareness because of those feelings can weaken your decisions and your peace of mind. Emotional strength is not about never feeling anything, but about not letting those feelings dictate your behavior. As this habit develops, your entire experience of life begins to shift. Problems that once felt overwhelming start to feel manageable. Conversations that used to trigger you lose their power over your mood. Delays that used to frustrate you become opportunities to think and adjust. You stop living in a constant emotional reaction cycle and start living in a state of awareness. And awareness is where clarity lives. You begin to trust yourself more, because every time you choose not to react impulsively, you prove to your own mind that you are in control. And self-trust is built through repeated evidence, not through words. Each moment of restraint strengthens your inner stability. Each pause reinforces your ability to think before acting. Over time, this builds a kind of mental resilience that cannot be easily shaken by external circumstances. People who master their reactions also tend to have more peace in their lives. Not because their life is easier, but because their mind is calmer. They are not constantly reliving situations in their head. They are not replaying arguments or imagining worst-case scenarios after every interaction. They let moments pass without carrying unnecessary emotional weight. This lightness becomes a quiet form of power because it frees energy for things that actually matter: growth, focus, purpose, and direction. It is also important to understand that reacting less does not make you passive. In fact, it makes your responses more powerful. When you are not emotionally triggered, your decisions become more intentional. Your words carry more clarity. Your actions become more precise. You stop wasting energy on emotional noise and start directing it toward meaningful outcomes. In that sense, control over reaction is not about silence. It is about intelligence in action. Over time, this habit reshapes identity itself. You no longer see yourself as someone who gets easily disturbed. You begin to identify as someone who observes, processes, and responds with intention. That identity shift is powerful because identity determines behavior, and behavior determines results. When your identity becomes stable, your life begins to stabilize as well. This is why mastering your reaction is not a small skill. It is the foundation of mental strength. Without it, even talented individuals struggle to stay consistent. With it, even ordinary situations become manageable stepping stones toward growth. Because the world does not stop testing you, but you stop being easily controlled by those tests. And slowly, without needing to announce anything to anyone, you begin to notice a quiet change. Things that once broke your focus no longer disturb your peace. Things that once controlled your emotions no longer control your decisions. You are still human, still feeling, still experiencing life fully, but now there is a layer of awareness guiding everything you do, and that awareness is what turns reaction into response, and response into real power. Most people never realize how much of their life is being shaped by noise they didn't consciously choose. From the moment they wake up, their attention is pulled in 100 directions: messages, videos, opinions, comparisons, updates, and endless distractions that feel harmless in isolation, but slowly fragment the mind over time. In the middle of all this, solitude begins to look uncomfortable, even unnecessary. But what feels like emptiness to most people is actually one of the most powerful environments for building clarity, direction, and inner strength. When a person avoids solitude, they are not just avoiding being alone, they are avoiding themselves. Because silence has a way of revealing what noise hides. In constant distraction, it is easy to ignore uncomfortable thoughts, unresolved emotions, and unclear desires. But when everything goes quiet, those inner realities start to surface. This is why many people feel uneasy when they are alone with no stimulation. It is not the silence itself that feels heavy, but the thoughts they have not faced yet. However, the same silence that feels uncomfortable at first is also the place where transformation begins. Because without external noise, the mind starts to settle. And when the mind settles, awareness increases. You begin to notice patterns in your thinking that were always there but never visible. You start to understand what truly drains you, what actually motivates you, and what direction feels aligned instead of forced. This kind of clarity cannot be found in constant stimulation. It only appears when the noise is reduced. Solitude is not about isolation from the world. It is about temporarily stepping away from the world's influence so that your own voice can be heard clearly. In a noisy environment, other people's opinions become louder than your own instincts. You start to shape your decisions based on external expectations rather than internal understanding. Over time, this leads to confusion, because you are no longer acting from a place of self-awareness, but from reaction to external pressure. But when you spend intentional time alone, something subtle begins to change. You stop reacting to everything immediately and start processing things more deeply. Instead of jumping from one distraction to another, your thoughts start to slow down, and in that slowing down, you begin to see your life from a higher perspective. Problems that felt overwhelming in the moment begin to look more manageable when observed calmly. Emotional confusion begins to untangle itself when it is not constantly being interrupted. One of the most powerful outcomes of solitude is self-honesty. In the presence of constant noise, it is easy to avoid uncomfortable truths. It is easy to convince yourself that you are fine, that you are progressing, or that you are satisfied, even when something inside feels unsettled. But in silence, there is nowhere to run from yourself. You begin to confront your habits, your choices, your fears, and your desires without distortion. And while this can feel uncomfortable initially, it is the foundation of real growth. Because you cannot change what you refuse to see clearly. Another transformation that comes from solitude is the strengthening of intuition. When your mind is constantly filled with external input, it becomes difficult to distinguish between what you truly think and what you have absorbed from others. But in quiet moments, your own thoughts begin to emerge more clearly. You start recognizing what feels right for you, not what is popular or expected, but what aligns with your deeper sense of direction. This inner clarity becomes a compass that guides your decisions more accurately than external advice alone ever could. Solitude also rebuilds focus. In a world where attention is constantly being divided, the ability to stay mentally present becomes rare. But when you intentionally spend time away from distractions, your mind begins to recover its depth. You regain the ability to think in longer, more meaningful patterns, instead of short bursts of scattered attention. This depth of thinking is what allows real problem solving, creativity, and strategic decision-making to develop. At the same time, solitude strengthens emotional independence. When you are always surrounded by stimulation or validation, your emotional state becomes dependent on external input. But when you learn to sit with yourself without needing constant entertainment or approval, you begin to develop a stable inner foundation. Your mood is no longer dictated by what is happening outside, but by how grounded you are within yourself. This creates a kind of emotional stability that makes you less reactive to external changes. Over time, solitude becomes less about being alone and more about being aligned. You start to notice that clarity does not come from doing more, but from removing unnecessary noise. You begin to value simplicity over overload, depth over distraction, and awareness over constant stimulation. And slowly, your decisions become more intentional because they are no longer being shaped by confusion, but by understanding. The irony is that in a world where everyone is trying to stay constantly connected, the people who grow the strongest are often those who are not afraid to step away from connection temporarily, because in that space away from everything, they reconnect with themselves. And that reconnection becomes the foundation for everything else: focus, discipline, direction, and confidence. And eventually, what once felt like loneliness transforms into strength. Because you realize that being alone with clarity is far more powerful than being surrounded by noise without understanding. Most people underestimate how life-changing small actions can be because they are conditioned to look for big, dramatic moments of transformation. They expect sudden success, overnight change, or a breakthrough that feels noticeable and exciting. But real growth rarely works like that. It does not arrive in one powerful moment. It builds silently through repetition, through consistency, and through the things you choose to do when nothing feels important. The truth is, your entire identity is being shaped not by what you do occasionally, but by what you do repeatedly, when no one is watching. At first, small actions feel almost meaningless. Waking up a little earlier, reading a few pages, practicing a skill for a short time, organizing your space, finishing a task without delay. None of these seem powerful in isolation. In fact, they often feel too simple to matter, because the human mind tends to underestimate anything that does not produce immediate visible results. But this is where most people make a critical mistake. They assume that if something is not producing fast change, it is not working at all. So they stop, restart, delay, and shift from one habit to another, never staying long enough for real transformation to begin. But consistency is not about intensity. It is about repetition. And repetition is what slowly rewires your identity. Every time you repeat a small action, you are sending a signal to your mind about who you are becoming. The first time you do something, it feels like effort. The second time, it feels slightly easier. The 10th time, it starts becoming familiar. And after enough repetition, it stops feeling like a decision and starts feeling like part of your nature. That is how identity is formed, not through motivation, but through evidence built over time. The problem is that most people only respect actions that feel significant. They wait for perfect conditions, high motivation, or strong emotional energy before they act. But discipline is not built in perfect conditions. It is built in ordinary ones. It is built when you do something even when you don't feel like it, even when there is no reward, even when nobody is watching. That is where the real shift happens, because you are no longer relying on feelings, you are relying on commitment. When small actions are repeated consistently, something subtle begins to change inside the mind. You start to trust yourself more, because self-trust is not created through promises, it is created through proof. Every time you follow through on something small, you reinforce the belief that you can rely on yourself. And every time you break that consistency, you weaken that trust slightly. Over time, this internal trust becomes one of the most important foundations of personal strength. Without it, even big goals feel unstable. With it, even difficult goals feel achievable. Another powerful effect of consistent small actions is that they remove resistance. At the beginning, starting something feels heavy because your mind resists change. It prefers comfort, familiarity, and ease. But when you commit to small steps, you reduce that resistance. Instead of trying to change your entire life in one attempt, you focus only on what you can do today. And this shift makes action more sustainable. You stop negotiating with yourself every time you need to begin, because the task no longer feels overwhelming. Over time, these small actions begin to accumulate in ways you do not immediately notice. Just like water slowly shapes stone, repetition slowly reshapes behavior, thinking patterns, and discipline. One day you look back and realize that what once felt difficult now feels natural. What once required effort now feels automatic. That is the hidden power of consistency. It works so quietly that you often don't recognize its impact until the results are already visible. But perhaps the most important transformation that comes from this habit is the shift in identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. This shift is subtle but extremely powerful, because once your identity changes, your actions begin to align with it naturally. You no longer need constant motivation to act because your behavior is guided by who you believe you are becoming. This is why consistency is far more powerful than occasional intensity. Intensity burns out, but consistency builds structure. Intensity feels exciting but temporary, while consistency feels ordinary but permanent. And life is ultimately shaped by what is permanent, not what is temporary. As you continue repeating small actions, you also begin to notice a shift in confidence. Not the kind of confidence that is loud or dependent on external validation, but a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are moving in a direction that is stable and self-directed. You are no longer guessing whether you are progressing. You can see it in your actions, even if the results are still unfolding. And slowly, without dramatic change, your life begins to reorganize itself. Your habits become more stable, your mindset becomes more disciplined, and your direction becomes clearer. Not because of one big decision, but because of countless small ones repeated with patience. In the end, what looks small in the moment becomes massive over time, and what feels insignificant today becomes the foundation of everything you become tomorrow. Most people think attention is something automatic, something that just flows wherever life takes it. They wake up, check their phone, scroll through updates, jump from one thought to another, and assume they are simply keeping up with the world. But what they do not realize is that attention is not passive. It is not something that just happens to you. It is something you are constantly spending, and whatever you spend it on begins to shape your thinking, your emotions, and eventually your entire life. Attention is the most valuable resource you have because it directly controls the quality of your mind. If your attention is scattered, your thoughts become scattered. If your attention is constantly pulled toward negativity, comparison, or distraction, your inner world slowly becomes restless and unfocused. You may not notice it immediately, but over time, a distracted mind becomes a tired mind. Not because life is too hard, but because the mind is being pulled in too many directions at once. What makes attention so powerful is that it works silently. You do not feel it changing you in the moment. Watching something meaningless for a few minutes does not feel harmful. Checking something quickly does not feel significant. Thinking about someone else's life for a moment does not feel impactful. But the mind does not measure impact in single moments. When you repeatedly give your attention to things that do not serve your growth, your mind slowly adapts to that level of input. This is why focusing your attention is not just a productivity skill, it is a form of self-protection. Every time you allow your attention to be hijacked by distraction, you are indirectly training your mind to lose focus more easily. And every time you intentionally bring it back, you are training it to become stronger. This constant direction of attention is what separates mental clarity from mental chaos. A focused life begins with understanding that not everything deserves your attention. There will always be more information than you can process, more opinions than you can evaluate, and more distractions than you can count. If you try to engage with everything, you end up deeply engaged with nothing. Your mind becomes full but not strong, busy but not productive, active but not meaningful. But when you begin to guard your attention, something powerful happens. You start to notice how often your mind moves without purpose. You become aware of how easily you are pulled into things that do not align with your goals or values. And this awareness is the first step toward control, because you cannot change what you are not aware of. At first, protecting your attention feels difficult. The world is designed to capture it. Notifications are built to interrupt you. Content is designed to keep you engaged. Conversations, comparisons, and constant updates are all competing for space in your mind. So choosing what to focus on becomes an intentional act, not a passive one. You have to actively decide what deserves your energy and what does not. And this is where transformation begins, because every time you resist distraction, you are strengthening your mental discipline. Every time you return your focus to what matters, you are reinforcing control over your own mind. Slowly, your attention stops being scattered across everything and starts becoming directed towards something meaningful. And direction is what turns effort into progress. As your focus improves, your thinking becomes deeper. Instead of jumping from one idea to another, you begin to stay with a thought long enough to understand it fully. Instead of reacting immediately to everything, you start observing before responding. This depth of thinking is where clarity comes from. And clarity is what allows better decisions, stronger discipline, and more effective action. Another important shift that happens when you protect your attention is emotional stability. A distracted mind is easily influenced by external triggers. It reacts quickly, overthinks often, and struggles to stay grounded. But a focused mind has more space between stimulus and reaction. That space creates calmness. You are less shaken by unnecessary information, because you are not constantly feeding your mind with chaos. Over time, attention becomes the foundation of identity. What you consistently focus on begins to shape how you see yourself and the world around you. If your attention is always on limitation,